The roots of the American Revolutionary War are deeply embedded in a series of events and philosophical disputes that unfolded between the American colonies and the British Crown in the years leading up to 1775. At the heart of the conflict was the issue of representation and governance. The colonies, despite being an integral part of the British Empire, had little to no say in the laws and taxes imposed upon them by the British Parliament. This disparity bred resentment, as the colonies increasingly viewed these impositions as an affront to their rights and liberties. The famous slogan, "No taxation without representation," encapsulated this sentiment and became a rallying cry for those advocating resistance. The economic strain placed on the colonies through acts such as the Stamp Act of 1765 further inflamed tensions. This act required colonists to pay a tax on a wide array of printed materials, from newspapers to legal documents. While the revenue was intended to cover the costs of British troops stationed in North America, many colonists saw it as an unwarranted burden imposed without their consent. The resistance was swift and vocal, with widespread protests, petitions, and even violent clashes breaking out across the colonies. Under pressure, the British repealed the Stamp Act, but this did little to quell the underlying discontent. Another pivotal moment came with the introduction of the Townshend Acts in 1767, which levied taxes on essential goods like glass, paper, and tea. The colonial response was equally fierce. Merchants organized boycotts, refusing to import British goods, and grassroots movements sprang up to promote self-reliance and local production. This era witnessed the rise of influential colonial leaders, such as Samuel Adams, who galvanized public opinion against British policies. Adams, along with others, played a key role in forming groups like the Sons of Liberty, a secret organization that used protests and propaganda to resist British authority. Perhaps one of the most iconic events leading to the Revolutionary War was the Boston Tea Party of 1773. This act of defiance occurred in response to the Tea Act, which granted the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. Though the act technically lowered the price of tea, it reinforced the principle of taxation without representation in raging colonists. In December 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped an entire shipment of tea into the water. This dramatic gesture was both a protest and a declaration of colonial resolve. The British government's response to the Boston Tea Party was severe and uncompromising. They enacted the Coercive Acts, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts, in 1774. These laws were designed to punish Massachusetts and deter further acts of rebellion. The measures included closing Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for, altering the Massachusetts Charter to reduce self-governance, and allowing British officials accused of crimes to be tried in England rather than the colonies. These actions further alienated the colonists and unified them in their opposition to British rule. As tensions escalated, colonial leaders convened the First Continental Congress in September 1774 to address their grievances and seek a peaceful resolution. Delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia to discuss their course of action. While there was no consensus on independence at this stage, the Congress issued a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, asserting the colonies' right to self-governance and their opposition to taxation without representation. They also agreed to impose economic sanctions on Britain, hoping to pressure the Crown into repealing the Intolerable Acts. Underlying these political and economic disputes was a philosophical shift influenced by the Enlightenment. Thinkers like John Locke had introduced ideas about natural rights, government by consent, and the social contract, which deeply resonated with colonial leaders. These principles provided a framework for questioning British authority and justifying resistance. Locke's assertion that individuals have an inherent right to life, liberty, and property, and that governments exist to protect these rights, was particularly influential. When a government fails to uphold these rights, Locke argued, it is the duty of the people to resist and seek change. These ideas permeated colonial discourse and became the ideological foundation for the eventual push for independence. This growing sense of identity and shared purpose among the colonies was not limited to the intellectual elite. Ordinary colonists, from farmers to artisans, were deeply engaged in this struggle. Pamphlets, newspapers, and public speeches disseminated revolutionary ideas far and wide. Figures like Thomas Paine would later play a crucial role in mobilizing public opinion. But even in the early stages of the conflict, the written word was a powerful tool for resistance. The colonies began to see themselves not just as subjects of the British Crown, but as a distinct community with its own aspirations and rights. The prelude to war also saw an increasing militarization of colonial resistance. Militia groups, composed of ordinary citizens, began organizing and drilling in preparation for potential conflict. These groups, often referred to as Minutemen, were ready to respond at a moment's notice to any British aggression. Their presence was a tangible sign of the colony's readiness to defend their rights by force if necessary. The British, aware of this growing unrest, responded by sending additional troops to maintain order, particularly in volatile areas like Boston. This only served to heighten tensions and increase the likelihood of confrontation. By the eve of the Revolutionary War, the relationship between the American colonies and Great Britain had reached a breaking point. Years of grievances, combined with philosophical and practical opposition to British policies, had forged a sense of unity among the colonies. While not everyone was in favor of outright rebellion, many colonists remained loyal to the Crown. There was a growing recognition that the existing relationship was untenable. The stage was set for a conflict that would not only determine the future of the 13 colonies, but also inspire other nations to challenge oppressive regimes and fight for self-determination. This period of escalating tensions and resistance was marked by a blend of defiance, diplomacy, and determination. The colonists' actions, both measured and dramatic, illustrated their commitment to securing a fair and just system of governance. The seeds of revolution were sown in these years of struggle, setting the stage for the events that would ultimately lead to the birth of a new nation. The American Revolutionary War was characterized by a series of pivotal battles and events that shaped the course of the conflict and ultimately led to the establishment of the United States. Each encounter between colonial and British forces carried profound significance, showcasing the determination of the American colonies to assert their independence and the resilience of the British Empire in trying to maintain control over its territories. The conflict began with the battles of Lexington and Concord in April 1775, often referred to as the "shot heard round the world." These confrontations marked the first instances of open armed resistance against British forces. British troops were dispatched to Concord to seize colonial weapons stockpiles and arrest key revolutionaries, but they encountered stiff resistance from local militias. The colonial forces, using guerrilla tactics and an intimate knowledge of the terrain, inflicted significant casualties on the retreating British troops. This early success boosted colonial morale and signaled that the colonies were prepared to fight for their rights. Shortly after, the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775 demonstrated the growing resolve and capability of the colonial militias. Although the British ultimately secured a tactical victory by capturing the Charlestown Peninsula, it came at a high cost. British forces suffered heavy casualties, losing over 1,000 men in their attempts to dislodge entrenched American positions. The fierce resistance displayed by the colonists shocked the British and proved that the conflict would not be easily won. This battle became a symbol of American bravery and commitment, inspiring further resistance across the colonies. Amid these early clashes, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia, where delegates began to take concrete steps toward independence. On July 4, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was adopted, formally severing ties with Great Britain. Drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, the document outlined the colony's grievances against King George III and articulated the principles of self-governance and individual rights. The Declaration not only united the colonies in their fight against Britain, but also resonated with oppressed peoples around the world, laying the ideological foundation for democratic movements in the centuries to come. The middle years of the war were marked by significant campaigns that tested the resolve of both sides. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge was a particularly grueling period for the Continental Army. Facing harsh conditions, disease, and a lack of supplies, the Army endured incredible hardships. Despite these challenges, it emerged stronger, thanks in part to the training and discipline instilled by Prussian military officer Baron von Steuben. This period of transformation was crucial in preparing the Continental Army for the battles that lay ahead. The war reached its decisive turning point at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. American forces, under the command of General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, achieved a critical victory by forcing the surrender of British General John Burgoyne's army. This triumph convinced France to formally ally with the American cause, providing much-needed military and financial support. The French alliance not only bolstered American resources, but also shifted the balance of power, making the war a global conflict and stretching British forces thin. In the final stages of the war, the Siege of Yorktown in 1781 marked the culminating event that sealed the American victory. General George Washington, with the assistance of French troops and naval forces, successfully encircled British General Cornwallis's army at Yorktown, Virginia. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending major hostilities. The victory at Yorktown was celebrated across the colonies and solidified the momentum for independence. These battles and events were more than mere military engagements. They were defining moments that showcased the evolving identity and resolve of the American colonies. Through a combination of strategic leadership, grassroots determination, and international alliances, the colonies overcame seemingly insurmountable odds to achieve their independence. The Revolutionary War, though brutal and costly, laid the foundation for a new nation built on principles of liberty and self-determination. The American Revolutionary War was shaped by the remarkable contributions of key figures on both sides, whose leadership and actions defined the conflict. On the American side, George Washington emerged as an indispensable leader, serving as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Washington's ability to inspire his troops, maintain their morale, and execute strategic retreats during difficult times ensured the survival of the revolutionary cause. His leadership at battles like Trenton, Princeton, and Yorktown cemented his reputation as a unifying force for the colonies. Thomas Jefferson played a crucial role in articulating the ideological foundation of the Revolution. As the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson eloquently expressed the colony's grievances and the universal principles of liberty and equality. His words not only rallied the colonists, but also resonated with people around the world, highlighting the philosophical underpinnings of the American fight for independence. Benjamin Franklin, a skilled diplomat and statesman, was instrumental in securing international support for the Revolution. His efforts in France led to the crucial Franco-American alliance, which provided military aid, funds, and naval power that proved decisive in the war. Franklin's ability to navigate the complex world of European politics showcased the global dimensions of the struggle for American independence. On the British side, King George III represented the determination of the British government to maintain control over the colonies. Generals like Charles Cornwallis and William Howe led British forces in key campaigns, often achieving tactical victories but failing to crush the spirit of the American resistance. Meanwhile, international allies such as the Marquis de Lafayette and Baron von Steuben offered expertise and resources that strengthened the American effort, underscoring the collaborative nature of the revolutionary endeavor. Together, these figures shaped the trajectory of the war and its eventual outcome. The American Revolutionary War culminated in a series of events that reshaped the geopolitical landscape and left a profound impact on global history. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially ended the war and recognized the independence of the United States. Negotiated by American diplomats such as Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, the treaty marked a significant turning point, as Great Britain formally ceded vast territories to the new nation. The boundaries of the United States were established to extend from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, and from Canada in the north to Florida in the south. This territorial expansion laid the groundwork for the future growth of the nation. The conclusion of the war also led to the withdrawal of British troops from American soil, symbolizing the end of colonial rule. For the former colonies, independence brought both immense opportunity and daunting challenges. The fledgling United States faced the task of building a functional government, establishing a stable economy, and addressing internal divisions. The Articles of Confederation, the initial framework for governance, proved inadequate in dealing with these issues, prompting the drafting of the U.S. Constitution in 1787. This document created a stronger federal government and established the principles of democracy, checks and balances, and individual rights that continue to define the nation. The impact of the war extended far beyond American borders. The successful revolution inspired other nations and peoples to challenge oppressive regimes. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, drew heavily on the ideas and successes of the American struggle. Revolutionary movements in Latin America, Europe, and beyond found encouragement in the precedents set by the United States. Domestically, the end of the war brought significant social changes. While the ideals of liberty and equality sparked discussions about slavery and women's rights, these issues remained largely unresolved in the immediate aftermath of the revolution. However, the principles enshrined in the Declaration of Independence continued to influence social movements in the years to come, laying the foundation for eventual reforms. Economically, the new nation faced the challenge of rebuilding after years of conflict. The war had disrupted trade and strained resources, but independence allowed the United States to establish its own trade networks and economic policies. The spirit of self-reliance and innovation that emerged during the revolutionary period fueled the growth of industries and commerce. The American Revolution was not only a struggle for independence, but also a transformative event that defined the ideals and aspirations of a nation. Its legacy endures in the principles of freedom, equality, and self-determination that continue to shape the United States and